We welcome all of you to this very exciting conversation on heat today. This summer, heat has been an incredibly persistent ordeal. There is no let up yet. But this is also not about one summer. Scientists tell us that such extremes and rising heat conditions are the result of irreversible climate change. And even if we succeed in stabilizing global temperature rise below 1.5 degree, the magic number, we will still experience extreme heat conditions and heat waves. Clearly, we have to now prepare ourselves for a new normal. This is only expected to worsen. But we often do not understand what does this global phenomenon of rising temperature means locally in our cities where we live, and what do we do to heat-proof our cities? How do we understand the local patterns of long-term trends or intensity of heat centers in our cities? And how do we adapt and protect ourselves when climate change has become irreversible? So, to understand this, our two teams in CSG, the Urban Lab and Sustainable Habitat, they have deep dived to analyze and understand one, the decadal trend in heat, relative humidity, and land surface temperature in our megacities, and also their unique patterns across cities to inform local action. And second, we have also tried to assess the local on-ground factors that contribute to heat island effect. Heat island effect that takes the temperature much higher than the surrounding areas. We have tried to understand also how expanding concrete surfaces with growing urbanization, shrinking vegetation and water bodies, and waste heat from exhaust from vehicles, air conditioners, industrial processes are impacting. We have also tried to understand the risks, particularly to the vulnerable groups, the elderly, children, the poor. So clearly, what you will also find out in due course, that this assessment has been an incredible journey and very insightful for us. So let us not wait any further, but hear them out. So let me first turn to Avikal and Sharanjit to distill the key learning from your deep dive analytics, and which I know is based on humongous data set for 6 megacities. And then Rajneesh, you will tell us about the on-ground reality in our cities and what do we do. So Avikal, if you take us through what we have learned.
Thank you, Anamita, for giving a great introduction to our study and research. Uh, I'm Avikal and I'm joined with my colleague Sharanjit, and we have been looking at the heat issues in 6 megacities and 4 smaller cities in last couple of years. And let me share my slides with you. Uh, okay. So hopefully everybody can see the slides.
Yes, we can
So
see it.
sure. So let's continue. As Anumita was talking, that this summer has been exceptionally hot and the air temperatures, like in Delhi, at some points they cross 50. But if we look at the average of all the stations in Delhi, the air was almost 48 degrees on average in and around Delhi. And it happened on 29th of May, which is a event or a historical number on its own. But if you see This follows a pattern. The two lighter lines you're seeing in this graph shows the 10-year average of the previous 2 decades. And you see the pattern is similar, but we are seeing a lot of jump. And we should also notice the minimum temperature is also rising. And this is the air temperature. But if we look at another matrix of measuring heat or discomfort from heat, which is heat index, which takes into account humidity, we'll see we did reach 58 degrees in that heat index on 29th of May. But that's not the worst which happens. In fact, the 10-year average of heat index even crosses 58 and reaches 59 in the month of July, which is still to happen when the monsoons start coming in and the humidity rises. So, this is the situation we are in. But how is this happened over years and what has changed in last 20 years is what interested us to understand where we are going and how we have reached where we are. So for that, the team has done extensive data analysis. We have looked data from January of 2001 till this month, last month, May of 2024. We have get we have taken data from IMD weather stations in the six mega cities, and almost all mega cities have more than one station. So they all the trends which we're going to talk about will be average of all the stations within the city. So it's not a point data. Then we have also looked into the satellite imagery for land use and heat coming from NASA, two different satellite images from the MODIS system and from the Landsat system to further assess the thing. Humidity data we have also acquired and done calculations about how heat index is developing in addition to regular air temperature with IMD reports. And most of these calculations and studies have done using softwares like Python and ArcGIS. So that being said, let's dive into the data itself. The analysis of the ambient air temperature in the six mega city shows uh, there is a change of hardly half a degree on average among these cities. And so the air is warm, hot, but for the summer average, which is starting from March till April, we don't see big deviation. In fact, if you see into individual cities, you will see Bangalore has become much more hotter than during this last 20 years compared to Hyderabad, which seems to be cooling down a little right now compared to the previous earlier 2001 to 2010. But there is something else happening which is making us feel more uncomfortable than we were earlier. And that magic thing or magic spice in the mix is that of relative humidity. Relative humidity has increased across all our cities. In fact, if you look at Kolkata, which was already very humid to start with, has become even more humid. In fact, there's an increase of almost 10% in certain years from the average of 2001 to 2010. And in the cities which were less humid, like Hyderabad, the increase is even more. We are seeing almost 20% increase in certain years compared to the average of 2001 and 2010. So the humidity is a factor which is increasing in all the mega cities we have analyzed. Even in Hyderabad, which is showing lesser ambient air temperature, humidity is high. And what does this mean? This means that the heat index, the actual feels like temperature, what people are reporting and are getting uncomfortable, has increased in all cities, and this increase is multifold compared to increase in the ambient air temperature. If you see, for instance, Delhi, the heat in Delhi air temperature are almost similar to what they were in 2001, 2010. But when you add the added heat coming from the humidity, that little relief which the city would have got from has actually disappeared. So heat has removed the advantage. In a city like Mumbai, which was already humid, this additional heat has made it even more unbearable. And that's the thing. In drier regions, the little relief which could have come from lower air temperature is removed because of increased humidity. And in coastal cities, which are already humid, the additional humidity has made the situation even worse over there. Even if the temperatures don't reach 40, even 32 seems like 40 degrees there. So that's the reality of local variation. Another very interesting thing which we noticed while doing our data crunching is that everybody keeps talking about 40, 45 degrees happening during the pre-monsoon period, which is May and April. But actual discomfort or heat index is getting much higher in the monsoon period. That has something to do with the change in the monsoon pattern. We don't get rains which are distributed over weeks. We get a big spurt in a small duration, and then we have no rains but high humidity across, which reflects in these patterns. If you see in Delhi, the pre-monsoon, which is March, April, and May, the average for last 10 years compared to 2001 to 2010 has actually come down a little. But when you see the monsoon, it has gone up. And in fact, if you see the two bars, monsoon temperatures are almost 8 degrees in heat index higher. So discomfort in monsoon is much higher than what it is during the drier season. Compare that with the coastal city of Chennai, where both seasons used to be very humid and uncomfortable, but you see, both have become even more uncomfortable. And the small distinction which used to remain between the dry season and the monsoon season has almost disappeared in the coastal cities. So both seasons are equally uncomfortable. So this is the local variation when it comes when you shift from one city in one climate zone to other city in other. But overall, the trend is same. The monsoons are becoming more uncomfortable, and both seasons, dry and wet, are also becoming more uncomfortable in general. Another thing which is happening and which we are not talking about because we keep hearing that the temperatures reach 45 or this is the night temperatures. What we have noticed in our analysis of last 24 years of data that when the sun sets, the cities used to cool down because you don't have the main source of heat in the city. So the temperatures of 40 degrees at in the day will cool down to 24, 23 degrees in the night. But we are noticing this drop from the daytime high to the night temperature is drastically reducing in every city with each passing year. In Delhi, for instance, the temp- in Delhi, for instance, the temperatures used to fall almost 13 degrees in the early 2000s, but now they are falling only 9 degrees. Similar patterns is seen throughout the thing, but of course, there is some local variation. You see, Kolkata is the anomaly over here. Kolkata, there's not much difference seen in how much temperature falls at night. It's still at 6 degrees, which is much lower. It's not like Delhi's 13 degrees. Delhi cools down much more, but it's cooling less. Kolkata used to cool down less and still cools down less. That's there. But if you see another city which is not coastal, like Hyderabad, the temperatures used to come down by 13 to 14 degrees in early 2000s. Now they are coming down only 9 to 10 degrees, which is a major drop. And this is the difference. That this you have to also take into account that the daytime temperatures have increased. So night times are even higher. So if we look and we look further into the whole thing that are these temperature drops and all even throughout the city? Or they are not even throughout the city because the weather stations of IMD are located at one point, usually at the airports. So in Delhi, the IMD station is at Safdarjung Airport and the Indira Gandhi International Airport. So we don't really know what's happening in the larger area. So we decided to map all the six cities, how the temperature variation is in the core of the city, in the outer city, and the larger rural belt around the city. And we found, for instance, in Delhi, Delhi's core is very green. It's one of the greenest core in all the cities in India. And we see the daytime temperatures are actually a little cooler than the periphery temperature. Because periphery is urbanizing at a very rapid rate and the greenery is not there. But when you look at the nighttime temperature, you'll notice though the inner city is very green and cooler during the daytime compared to the periphery, the night is much hotter, in fact, 3 degrees more than the periphery. So that means the periphery is still cooling down 13, 14 degrees as it used to, but the inner city is not cooling down. Inner city is much more hotter during the night. And it's not just Delhi, it's even other cities which are more atypical, which are more typical because the core is not as green and the periphery is much more greener, like in case of Kolkata. You'll see the daytime temperatures are higher, almost 2 degrees than the outside of the city. But the same thing it happens at the night. In fact, night is much warmer in the core than the periphery. So this pattern, even though the greenery within the city center can alter the daytime temperature differences, but the night still seems to be a big problem for the central areas of the city than the outer areas. And why is this happening? For that, we studied the land use pattern and how green and blue areas are changing in these mega cities. And my colleague Sharanjit will tell you more about this analysis because she spearheaded this thing. Sharanjit, up to you.
You are on mute,
Yeah,
Sharon.
unmuted. Yeah, so apart from the relative humidity and ambient temperature, the another most important factor that is contributing to the heat stress in the cities is land surface temperature. Now, how these land surface temperature is impacting the heat stress and how it is varying among the cities. So the changes in the land use features are the majorly impact the land surface temperature in the cities. Primarily, the increase in the built-up area and the decrease in the green cover in the blue areas have the compounding effect on the land surface temperature. We have analyzed six mega cities, the land features. We have shown almost all the mega cities have shown increase in the built up areas, while the green cover having the different varying features, wherein Delhi, Hyderabad, and Bangalore shown green in green cover, and Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai shown decline in the green cover. However, the concretization growth and the pattern is different among the cities. Avikal, can you please change the slide? As you can see, for instance, Kolkata has the greatest area under its concrete, that is the 80% of the coverage, whereas it has shown the least green cover. And comparatively, Delhi has shown the highest coverage under the green cover and the least among the concrete. But both of these cities have shown the different structures in the cities. As Avikal told, Kolkata as an anomaly because Kolkata has already undergone the concretization structure 10 to 20 years back, and therefore no natural space is left in the city to convert it into the concrete structure. Now, apart from the mega cities, smaller cities have also undergone various changes. As you can see in the Jaipur has undergone a major rapid concrete structures. For instance, if we talk in terms of the percentage, it has changed from 35 percentage to the 86 percentage, which is almost a double. And in Chandigarh, which is a planned city of the India, is also undergone a massive rapid concretization and contributing to the rise in urban heat stress. In a similar way, Lucknow and Pune is also changing, shown a great massive rapid concretization and undergone a heat stress. Now, how these urban structures are correlating with the uh, urban heat stress? For example, firstly, buildings in urban areas are made up of bricks or concrete. These all are the dark colored objects or materials that absorb heat or attract more heat. And they trap the heat within the buildings, which in turn release energy into the atmosphere. As the buildings attract the heat more, they will require more cooling from the air conditioners, which in turn exchange heat within the atmosphere and thus contributing to the local heating. These all are the cascading effects that contribute to the expansion in the urban heat islands. Now, I'm taking the two examples of the cities, Bangalore and Delhi. Both have the increase in their green cover, but they have the opposite impact on the heat stress. For example, in Bangalore, in 2023, the average LST was observed at 25 degrees Celsius. However, it is significantly cooler than the 2003 because there is an increase in the green cover. However, comparatively in Delhi, there is a green cover increase from 32% to 44%. Despite increase in the green cover, there was a dramatic increase in the land surface temperature in 2022. That is, the whole city is exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. Apart from the center of the core, which is vegetation, is covered by enough vegetation or the green cover, but still it is observed with the temperature of 38 to 40 degrees Celsius as compared to 2003, which is significantly increased that was observed at 30 to 33 degrees Celsius. Now the question arises, apart from the increase in the green cover, why these cities are under the grip of the heat stress? Why it is not helping in moderating the land surface temperature? So next slide, please, Abhita. So as we can see, in Delhi, if we talk about 2001 to 2010 average, Delhi managed to come down to reduce 12.3 from daytime peak to nighttime low, but it get reduced to 9.8 in 2023. So the question arises, why this green cover is helping in moderating the daytime temperature and not the nighttime temperature? Because if we can see at the structure of the Delhi, the central core is densely packed, or there is a poor ventilated spaces, or there is an inappropriate structure of the buildings that is not helping down the sunlight to emit back into the atmosphere, and thus the trapping heat in the buildings causes the night to get more hotter. Therefore, often the heat get build up in the day, get more pronounced after the sunset due to the slow release of the heat in the urban areas, and thus the the people are not getting enough time to recover from the heat. Even the temperature is getting higher at the night. Now I will hand over to Avikal to get conclude this slide.
Thank you, Sharanjeet. So, as Sharanjeet was telling, though Delhi is much greener in the center, and it also helps in keeping the daytime temperature a little lower, not much, during the heat waves and during the general summer. But it's not able to cool down in the night. And that's a very big question mark on how we gonna make adaptation in our cities, because just adding trees is not the solution as Delhi and Bangalore are showing. Something additional needs to be done. As Sharanjeet was telling, the nighttime temperatures are problematic in almost all the cities, but they are most problematic in the city centers, because not just though the main source of heat, sun, is gone, but city is generating heat within. There are a lot of heat, waste heat being generated and put into the city in form of exhaust. So when the sun goes out, the heat which source changes from the sun to the exhaust coming from the vehicles, from the buildings, from the factories, and the concentration of these sources is much higher in the core of the city than the periphery. And with the green cover and all, these these exhausts tends to get trapped near the surface of the city and keeps the temperature high, which becomes a very big problem. Why is it a problem? The summer this year was not an anomaly. Because, as Anumita said earlier, that even if we are able to stop the climate change from worsening and and keeping the global warming at 1.5 degree, IPCC is categorically saying that even if that happens, heat waves will continue to happen and worsen. So just stopping global warming is not going to help stop the heat waves. Heat waves are here to stay. Further, the humidity. IMD himself has concluded that over 90% of stations in India, IMD stations, have registered tremendous increase in specific humidity in this country. The reasons for it are still unclear, but it is a pattern which is observed throughout the country. So almost whole of India, 90% of India is getting more humid even before monsoon reaches this country. So it's a problem. Why it's a problem? Because humidity changes the nature of the heat. Human body's defense to heat is basically sweating. When you sweat, the sweat evaporates, and that evaporation helps the body and skin to cool down. When the humidity increases, the sweating is hindered because there is already high humidity in the air. The sweat doesn't evaporate. That means the body doesn't cool down. And it has very major consequences because in dry heat, the health risk is actually dehydration because you're sweating too much and you get dehydrated, and that's dangerous. But in case of high humidity, you are not able to sweat, which means the internal heat builds up in the body, which leads to organ failures, which is a much more dangerous and fatal condition than dehydration. So, this increasing humidity across the city is dangerous for human health. It's not something to be taken seriously. And all the talks we are having about adaptation to heat is missing this humidity component, which needs to be taken seriously. Further, as we have been talking, urban heat island can add almost 2 degrees to the ambient temperatures apart from what is happening at a larger atmospheric level. We also saw in our graphs that city cores were 2 to 3 degrees warmer in India. And this is a problem because the concretization and waste heat can add 2 degrees, but to counter that, the urban centers mostly rely on air conditioning. And there are multiple studies which have found that air conditioning on their own, when switched on during the heat wave condition, have the ability to increase the outdoor temperatures by another 2 degrees. So this becomes a compounding and cyclic problem. Hotter it gets atmospherically, we try to cool ourselves and we end up heating more, which is a big problem. And this heat which is being generated is actually mostly polluting the night time. So night temperatures are increasing. And IPCC again points out that the nights are going to get even more warmer because of urbanization and heat than the daytime. So the minimum temperature is going to rise, and the rise in the minimum temperature is in fact deadlier because it doesn't give the human body and the proper time to recover and recoup from whatever wear and tear has happened during the daytime to start the next day afresh. And the Lancet study has actually said categorically that the death risk from hot nights is going to increase 6 folds, much more than the death risk from the daytime temperature. So, when we are talking about our cities, we have to start thinking if Delhi is not cooling down at night, and if Kolkata is not cooling down at night, the risk it puts on the public health is much higher than what 45 degrees during the day will put during those 2 or 3 hours. So while we do our heat resilience planning and and heat proofing our infrastructure and city, we need to keep these things into mind that the humidity is a problem, nighttime temperatures is a problem, and the case studies of Delhi and Bangalore are showing even with a greener center, it's helping with the daytime heat, but it's somehow not of any use for the nighttime heat. So we need to start working from that. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. You can read our detailed reports. They are on our CSE website. And I will hand it over back to Anumita.
Thanks so much, Avikal. That's fascinating. When we begin to look at the data so microscopically, then you begin to realize the complex web. And more important, that is just not such a simple narrative, a binary narrative that global warming happening, so cities are heating up. But the fact that how not a wrong interventions, the way we are developing, the way we are modernizing, and the way our urban infrastructure is shaping up, that how that is contributing additionally to trap heat. And therefore, even with the little effort that cities are making to do greening, is just not showing up, not making an impact, which shows that much more fundamental steps will have to be taken, not only to cool down, but also to reduce heat generation in the city. So we'll come back to some of these questions, and I can already see a lot of questions coming in. But before that, we want to understand from Rajneesh, and Rajneesh, you have been to some of the cities and looked very closely and mapped out that not only about general warming up, but where the heat centers are in the city. And then you looked very closely that what could be the local sources, what might be contributing to the trend. So if you can tell us something about your findings and what are the key takeaway, and then we go to the next round.
Right. Thank you. I think it's like one of the very interesting area for Avikal and Sharanjit has given you very clear overview of that there is something which is going wrong right now in our cities. But I think everybody is struggling right now to find an answer. And most of the questions which are coming from is where this issue comes from. Like if I compare, yes, there is a very clear evidence which is there. The buildup is growing. Like in this particular map which I'm showing to you, these dots are basically the RERA projects. So actually, if I look at the small circle part where it is here, it's about the project which has been added in 2020, 21, and later on. So there's a huge intensification of a built-up being coming up in these areas. There's moment you come into this, you know that there is reduction in the green. There will be definitely an impact onto the water bodies also, because largely any of the construction projects, they disturb to some extent the whatever the kind of flows and the natural system which exists with us. Now, how much is this built up we are talking about? I'm talking about very small pocket. And if I compare this is around 4 lakh, you can say roughly the square meter of the built up which is being added. So it's an amount which is very huge. It's a number which is going to disturb almost everything which is around you. Now, this is just a small pocket in Jaipur adding up to this amount of built up. And what does this buildup actually does? So when you look at this fabric density, so it's basically a perimeter of a building with the average height, which is like you can say area of facade. And generally we, as in our urban planning, we call it floor space index, but this is different parameter. It's talking about how much of a facade which has been added to the total area of the plot which were there. Now, when you look at this particular picture, this is what Avikal and Sharanjit was telling you, that there is a huge amount of heat absorption which is happening in the kind of build-up which we are doing. Mostly these are concrete structures. And when you look at from below to above, because we've analyzed various parameters, the aspect ratios is one, then sky view factors is another one. We have looked into morphologies of these areas. We look at infragenic heat in terms of your vehicles and things like that. I'll keep exploring those one another parameters on this. But this one is something which is very important, and it intensifies the heat to great extent. So whatever the heat is absorbed, it comes out in the night, and that's where the whole equations disturbs, because your delta is dropping now. So because anything which requires which rises, it requires a drop also, and drop is not happening. Then why the cores are heating up? Like if you look at Connaught Place, yes, there is it's nice. It has a lot of green. It has white in color and all. But when you actually look at a little more granular information, what you have is you have road parkings, and then you have a built up, and you have 1/4 of that is in green. Now, and there is a hell lot of vehicles which are parked on it, and there is a lot of vehicles coming every day, standing as a park lot, also adding to a lot of, like, you can say their air conditioners are running, the anthropogenic heat which is there because of heat trees and all. So these all adds up into this area. So moment it adds up, the absorption agents in any case remains short of what kind of intensification we have already taken place in this. Now, whatever lungs you have, whatever you can say the absorption pads in terms of green or water, because Connaught Place has water fountains and things, so microclimate is different altogether. But we expect, yeah, this will be a little better. But when you look at the surroundings, your structures are rising, and this is the only low pocket which is left with you. So these all contributions are now coming and making a very mixed cocktail of land surface temperatures which are beyond our hands. And whatever green also we are adding, so it's like typically we do have a lot of reservation of green with us, which certainly from, you can say for remote sensing, you judge this, that there is a green, but they are may not be effective greens with you. So the canopy covers are reducing the kind of green which we have, like in this particular patch where we show you that when you look at the surface temperatures, there is almost a huge amount of difference when it's shaded, unshaded, or it's with some kind of shrubs or something like that. Like, because there is a huge amount of concentration of heat happening on this black, you can say the roads which are around you, and then you needed certain amount of covers which are reducing, and the kind of, you can say the type of green is also becoming very different. It's like palm and other things which are more functionally may not be very poor, but yes, they are the one who are dominating your landscapes. Then comes a very important part is what type of material are you really bringing up into your cities. So if you really have MS structures, like when the poor people wear their house, their constructions are rightly not guided, the material choices are very poor, they have not been given any incentives and as well as push in this direction. So what happens is with two different kind of rooftops covers with you, automatically the temperature start bouncing, your surface temperatures start bouncing much more in that. Now here is something where the intervention has to be like really looked at, that what are the safeguards which the city needs to build up? What are the change in the bylaws? What are the change in really the material fabric which we are looking at? What kind of material should we really allowed at? Like Bangalore is an example. Most of the Karnataka housing, affordable housing, which has been added, it's all concrete structures which are being added. So the microclimatical advantage which was there in Bangalore has been neutralized to great extent with the kind of typology of the construction which is being done over there. So the aspect is very clear. Like this is IWA, which clearly tells you if you go away with the kind of temperature drop as well as the distance associated to it. So whether you have a vertical green, you have a water sprinkler, you have pond, you have trees, urban parks, rivers, you definitely feel a level of cool which is available and at a particular distance also far off from those locations. So when you cross Yamuna or you cross they may not be very functional rivers to you, but yes, whenever you cross there, you will definitely observe a temperature drop. Whenever you cross a university, you will definitely see there is a temperature drop. The reason is primarily because you have a predominance of these two factors around you. But they need to be gelled really well. Unless these things are not stitched properly and their functionality is not associated with the kind of build-up we do, we will definitely keep facing these kind of issues and concerns. I'm sorry, I'm not taking you further deeper into it, but with this I stop and hand it over to Anamita so that we can take up your questions in case they are a very important one.
Thanks a lot for that granular view, Rajneesh. It's so insightful to know that, how the local changes in landscape, in morphology, in built-up area, all that's combining to contribute to create the heat centers. So I can already see a lot of questions and I will ask them in a group. So some questions related to what Abhikal has said. And Abhikal, you have, so one particularly from Abhinaya Shekhar, where she's asking that what is the reason for decrease in LST, land surface temperature in Bangalore? And another point which you have actually touched upon, Abhikal, but maybe you can still just make it a little bit more explicit, that why the core area of Delhi should be hotter during night time compared to the outer Delhi. And then there is some reference to what about the rural areas and what kind of impacts you see there. So if you can take them in a combined way, then we go to the next slot.
Thank you, Namita. Thank you for the questions, everybody. First thing about the Bangalore LST. So the the LST map which we showed in our slides is of different days, and the slide we showed, and you should not be seeing it at absolute temperatures as such, because the slide we showed for 2003 is taken on a very hot day, and the slide we showed for 2023 was not as hot day. That's why the colors are a little different. What is more important to see the relationship within the city in relative fashion. So, though in our map it looked like the Bangalore in 2003 LST was much higher and lower in 2023, but that's not a good measure. We are seeing which areas within the city in that specific day were hotter and colder, and we found that there is a lesser variation in heat in 2003 than it was in 2023 compared to 2003. So Bangalore LST has not gone down. It's just that it is really dependent upon the day the satellite passes over and when that is available. So Bangalore is not cooler now, but that's the thing. Second question, you were asking why the core of Delhi is not cooling down at night. I had already hinted about it earlier. Because of all the waste heat which is generated in the city, and specifically the core, which is well off, which is kind of now addicted to air conditioning and vehicles. So amount of vehicles running in the core, the gases coming out of it, so pollution, and also the exhaust, because when you're burning fuel, the gas, the tailpipe exhaust is pretty hot if you have ever stood next to it. That's all the exhaust coming out of your air conditioners. That's another thing which is adding. And overall, during the daytime, the whole concrete surface area of the city also absorbs a lot of heat. All them to put together, and the inability of, because of high pollution in the core, inability of it to get radiated back into the sky gets highly limited. So it's also a pollution also has a role to play because it's trapping the heat at the night. And another very important thing which we have not dealt in this, but there's also a connection with the ozone pollution which happens during the summer. Ozone is a heat trapping gas, and we are noticing that in Delhi specifically, at night we are also, ozone should disappear at night, but it is not disappearing in Delhi, which is also adding to the urban, higher temperatures at night in Delhi. So that's the Delhi question. The third question, which is about the rural areas and the impact. Rural areas are also going through similar transformation as our cities are going. The kacha ghar of mud houses and the stone houses in the rural areas are now being converted into concrete houses. And even though they don't have the whole cocktail of problems which urban heat produces, but they have a smaller version of it. And given that the rural areas don't have the infrastructure to deal with this increased heat, they don't get 24/7 electricity supply to run air conditioning. They are much more prone to be working outdoors, so they get exposed more. So the rural areas have a similar problem as the urban areas, but at a smaller scale. But given they don't have the infrastructure and the amenities to deal with this, the impact, especially health impact of these, are more pronounced in rural areas and urban areas.
Great. So I see another group of questions, and that Rajneesh, you can reflect on them. And Avikal, if you have anything to add. So Ranjit Gadgil is asking a certain set of very interesting questions. One, is there any statutory recognition of heat index by the government of India? And he is referring to some press release of maybe PIB, which is kind of something seems to have been done. But is that adequate? But also, what do we know about the international best practice on this issue? And whether what are the regulations that are relevant and message, whether that's adequate. And and another interesting point that he's raising is that the trade-off between the air pollution control measures and heat. So to control dust in cities, cities are paving, expanding roads and doing paving end to end. And that, of course, is creating more surface area to absorb heat. So how do we address that? There's a kind of a group of questions around regulations, whether we are adequately addressing. So if you want to reflect on that.
So the direct answer to this is whether we do have adequate safeguards or right policy push or something like that. I can say that the response is very average or poor in this. We do have heat action plans which are coming up, but largely they are emergency response. And we do have certain, you can say, diktat which is coming from model building bylaws has been modified recently, as well as the urban design formulation guidelines also, where there is a lot of discussion which has been given on cool roof, as well as greening, increasing the green cover, water bodies and all. But that comes in, doesn't comes in as a performance characteristic. It comes in as like a kind of a observation, yes, you should do this. It's like everybody is given, yeah, try to do this. And that try to do is gets diluted when you don't have any performance characteristics which are associated with it. That what exactly you need to do. Like Telangana has done one effort is where they are trying to bring in the subsidy for the cool roof systems. Now this is measurable. You know that how much of that is converted, how much of that will result in what kind of maybe certain more advantages which is there from any other city. And this is something which is not new to us. We have seen Rajasthan, most of the cities have been using this for ages. It's part of our traditional wisdom which is there with us. So and the other thing which we do, which we look at unguidedly going in this is like as Avikal was saying, Sharanjit is also telling you, and I also told you, the materials are very important in this because they absorb heat. Now, what kind of material are we talking about? The Econova Summit or ECBC guidelines, which we have for residential as well as for commercial, they talk about what type of material you should use that. But the mandate is still very poor because housing is a state subject. Until unless state ratifies it, national guidelines are there. They are asking you to do something changes on that. But until unless state ratifies it and actually bring it into the fabric of construction, you will not see the visible changes coming up. And with regard to air pollution as well as the connections between this, yes, under this 2000 up till the 15th Finance Commission has given a lot of money to these non-attainment cities where they're supposed to bring up a betterment into the air quality. And it's not only extending the road limits and by arresting the dust. That's the way people understand, because they only understand, municipal corporation understand only making roads and footpaths. They don't understand the microclimate enhancements. Even the fountains are one part of it. Even having a tree cover is also one part of it. There are almost around 30 parameters, more than that, where municipal corporation needs to perform on these parameters. But largely, because they understand only making roads and pothole repairs and also their maximum expenditures goes into that direction. That is how the comprehension is wrong. So somebody needs to guide them properly, that because when you work on air pollution, there is a co-benefit of cooling also, which is automatically given to you. But until unless you comprehend it in a nice way, and rather in a way where it has an impact on urban design.
Right. And before I move on to Avikal,
I can add.
Okay, Avikal, you want to add
Yeah,
something?
no. So the other question which was asked, if there is a formal recognition of heat index in India or not. So IMD over last decade or something has multiple time published its formula and studies on how to calculate heat index for Indian perspective, but it has not really been adopted. For instance, even now the heat alerts are only given on in terms of ambient temperature maximum and not heat index. Even the heat waves are defined only on air temperature and not heat index, which other countries use heat index as such. So for our analysis, we use the American NOAA's heat index formula to calculate, but that's the situation. As far as the second part of the thing was if anything has been done internationally to uh, to tackle this kind of problems. In fact, this is a very new area. India is suffering these things first. West is just starting now. So this lot of actions are starting to happen abroad as well, but they are not really foolproof or have actually able to demonstrate impact in reducing heat in the city centers. One of the most effective things which happened in Europe after the deadly heat waves of 2003 and 2006 is that they have started air conditioning their houses. So that's their response, which is actually can work for them in a certain fashion, but we are noticing that it's not a solution. It actually makes the situation worse. So, what will be a good solution for it is still a big question mark. And the whole world is actually looking at India now because we are already suffering and we are the ones who our solutions and our experiments are going to lead how the rest of the world does things.
Absolutely. And so before I come back to you, Avikal, there's just one follow-up question from Shivani. And Rajneesh, I know you have looked into this specifically, and she's asking, is rising number of vehicles on road also contributing to the heat stress? Both of you have commented on this, but I recall, Rajneesh, that when you were studying like Pune and other cities, you specifically looked at the vehicles, the metal surface, the parking surface, and how that is contributing to the heat buildup. So would you like to reflect on that?
Yeah, see, the urban morphology has a lot of things to suggest to you. And one of that is like when you have very high density constructions or apartments or the kind of construction around you, it attracts a lot of vehicle also in that spaces. Now, those vehicles exhaust, not only vehicle exhaust, you will have much more density of, as I think Avikal and Charanjit has mentioned, because there are a lot of anthropogenic heat activity which are there in that area because of the concentration of human population. You will have eateries, you will have tandoors, you will definitely will have vehicles exhaust there. You will have your DG sets also there because there are a lot of white good penetration will be there. Because right now we are not working on anything called district cooling. We are working on individual air cooled based air conditioning largely with us. So white good penetration and your consumptions, these are a lot of factors. It's almost, you can say, if I weigh these three things together, the anthropogenic activities like these will be significantly contributing to these. So examples are many such. So what you do when you many of the people think that high rise is a good solution and maybe low rise is not a great solution. Yeah, somewhere mid-rise becomes a very good solution because you have a lot of urban design elements which can play a role in that space which is in that. Because otherwise what will happen is your scale of your green and your height and other concentration which you are is much higher now, much higher. And most of the typologies of newer construction which we are adding is all high-rise now. So this is where the concentration, your city is actually showing you the tidal flows of these vehicles every day. Why it is being showing? Because you have a tidal flow daily morning time, you have a peak on one side, and evening you have peak on other side, which clearly indicates what kind of densities and off balance these cities are right now. That's where somewhere we need to work on, and I think morphology has a lot of good answers to work at. Once we balance this, you will definitely see a little more productivity coming in this direction.
Absolutely. Abhikar, I know ever since we have put out the heat study, one question that keeps coming to us, and there seems to be a kind of I didn't say confusion, but this whole concern around. So one is the CO2 increase, and another is the heat increase. And I see one question related to that. That one Mr. Ashok is asking that global warming is caused by CO2, and what options do we have in dealing with that? Now, we of course here not discussing mitigation strategies for CO2, but we confront this question quite a bit when we are trying to explain that why heat is increasing and the adaptation requirement, vis-a-vis the mitigation requirement.
Yeah.
So if you can reflect on that.
Yes, that's one of the most common questions which I face when the study was put out. And it's a very common and obvious confusion when it comes to climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. So, yes, heat waves have become more intense and more prolonged, and will continue to happen because the climate is changing, which is being caused by the emissions, carbon emissions, which are happening. But even if we stop these emissions, and as IPCC also pointed out, if we stop and we restrain the global warming to 1.5 degrees, these heat waves will continue to happen, and in fact might even get more intense. So adapting to these heat wave has nothing to do with cutting emissions. Climate has changed enough already that this is the new reality. And now we need to learn how to adapt and live with these things. So, adaptations needed for these heat waves in our cities and rural areas is going to be very different than just cutting emissions. We need to change how we are building, how we are designing our infrastructure and services delivery, and how we're going to make sure that the 40 degrees or even 50 degrees of air temperature doesn't feel like 70 degrees within the city, which is what the problem right now is. And to make sure that the 50 remains 50, not 70 in the cities, we have to do a lot of things, which Rajneesh pointed out, which has to do with what kind of surfaces we are building, what kind of green we are planting, how to manage the blues and the rivers and lakes in the city, and also how we gonna manage the waste heat in the city. Everybody keeps putting their AC compressor exhaust in their balcony and putting the heat into your neighborhood, making your neighborhood warmer. Can we do it something differently, that the heat which is coming out from your exhaust doesn't remain in the city but is dissipated up in the sky like we do with the pollution? Is possible? Will it be a technological solution? Will it be an engineering solution? Or will it require a larger behavioral change and our perception of what is thermally comfortable? So that's a thing which we need to do irrespective if we are cutting emissions or not cutting emissions. This we need to do additionally. So adaptation is different from mitigation. And it's pretty clear, like we have missed the mitigation bus. 1.5, we might not meet. And we have to live with this 50-degree heat now. And we need to start building for that.
Yes, so true. Rajneesh, there are two questions. One, very interesting, Mr. Hari Ram Yadav asking, and he's saying that what is the correlation, or is there a correlation that exists between temperature and the decreasing ability of water percolation due to insulated drainage or concrete surfaces, so that the water is not getting adequately percolated, not permeable enough, and therefore how that is impacting heat. And another question from Dr. Yash Chawla, and he's saying that what stops the municipal corporation from stipulating a white roof or the cool roof? And so these are the two questions, if you would want to reflect on.
Sure. So definitely there is a good relationship which is there. Once you have water and there the combinations of percolability is there, and these combinations adds a lot to the comfort which is there. So microclimate enhances and the things works very well for you. But unfortunately, what exactly is happening is totally reverse of what we expect to do. So your green covers are reducing, the way we are managing the water is like more, rather than absorbing into a decentralized manner and the fashion, which is generally should be a good practice for you. What you're trying to do is you're taking the water away from your towns, right? So, or maybe away from your neighborhoods instead of utilizing them. So all your drainage and everything goes away, and then you bring the whole water back. And then you never have an adequate water to make the microclimate good the way it should be. But now with this zero discharge standards, which are now coming up, I think the neighborhoods needs to learn and adapt to it, that how they can utilize this treated water and otherwise into such of the features, and as well as increase the percolability to a great extent. Because the kind of development which we are doing is like we don't have functional greens with us. We have a podium greens with us. You generally have two basements, and then on top of that you have a little grass covers and maybe a palm trees which is there. But that's not green. That's not percolable green, and that doesn't add to the functional green which you needed. Like there are certain guidelines internationally. Singapore actually talks about when you have a good canopy covered trees with you, they give you 6 marks for it. When you have a shrub or something, they give you 3, and when you have grass, they give you 1. But in our case, we do not define them according to their functionality to a great extent. We define them, yes, there is a green. It could be earmarked green also. A Maidan could also be qualified as a green in that case. But that doesn't add much. Rather, it could become one of the heat center. Now, when your water body reduces, they turn into a heat center. Because the reason is, if they dry up, what is left on the surface? Left on the surface is something which will resonate and bounce the heat much more for you. Now, that means you have to have a water there in these water bodies, because when we compare these land surface temperatures, the dried, because as you were saying, that the kind of month and the duration, when you measure these and compare this, becomes very important. Because when these water body dries up, the same place which was cool will add to a land surface temperature kick also for you. Now, these combinations needs to be really worked at. Then only the possibilities could be worked. And I think this is one of the very important parameters. The second question was, sorry, I missed that.
Yes. So I'm just looking at the time, and I think we have time for 2 more questions. So one, Abhikar, there's one, I see Divya Thakur. I'm curious about the fact that are LST affected by anthropogenic heat emissions? I mean, you can think about that. And Rajneesh, there's Mr. Sunil Biswal. And I think to summarize the long question that he has asked, he's probably asking about the wind patterns in the city getting obstructed by built structures, flyovers, buildings, and therefore, and you have worked on the layout and you know how the whole morphology affects. So both of you can reflect on these 2 last questions, and then we can conclude.
Yeah. Thank you, Namita, for that really technical question. If LST is affected by anthropological heat, you have it can be there are 2 answers to it. So since the LST is directly influenced by the kind of surface which is there, what kind of surface you're measuring, so humans are changing the surfaces in and around cities. So concretization is, and the concretes absorb heat. So it can be argued that the heat being absorbed by concrete surfaces is anthropogenic, and that is what the LSTs are reading. So yes, in a way, LSTs are affected by anthropological factors. But anthropological heat, when we talk just about the exhausts coming from the vehicles and from houses and from the factories, does influence the air temperature to a large extent. Their impact on the LSTs directly is a little understudied, so we don't really know. But the sheer human activity of changing surfaces is directly related to how LSTs are affected. So that's it.
So the wind definitely is, because wind hydraulic of the cities are getting low. So we do not have a good studies of, because earlier, yes, there used to be a good thought which goes well into it, because the cities need to flush out their heat also. Because now when the kind of FAR we're doing, we're actually adding a concrete mountains around our structure, or all our cities. FARs are added at the external part of the cities mostly, and there's like a ring radial of the high-rise structure which is around every city which is now being built up. Now, this actually tweaks a lot of your wind patterns to a great extent, because the height of your predominant height around in your vicinity, that impacts the wind flow. And either there will be it's a huge amount of wind which will be flowing, or there will be no wind flowing at all. Now, this depends on how you really staggered your buildings or really done a good design. So when we looked at the kind of development which is coming around 125 acres, you can say the common gated communities which are coming up, when we reviewed, it's around 60 to 70% of the layout is not going according to the wind directions or the way it should happen. Now, what will happen there? The heat which is there will never be able to flush out. The air pollution which is there will never be able to flush out from your towns and remains there for a very longer period with you. Keep bouncing back into this. So one will radiate, the second will absorb. And that is the kind of impact which you will have. And there will be no escape. Then you will have a heat dome around you. This heat dome will never let that heat or as well as the pollution to go away from the city and remain resonating for a very longer period. And these are some of the side effects which we are getting now. And somewhere we need to think. I don't think so. We have any city right now being planned according to it. But Bureau of Energy Efficiency has given you CFD tool, which is there on their website. If somebody wants to really do a hands-on it, you can try it over there. There's some new, and it's a free of, you can download freely. So that is something tool which we need to now really bring into our urban fabric while we design that.
Right. And before we conclude, Sharanjit, I'm just curious because, you have been kind of going to seeding the data, millions and millions of data points, both of you. I'm just wondering that, a good governance, especially good heat management, will certainly require a very strong database, climate data platforms in the cities to be able to inform the policy making. Now, having seen the way the data exists today in India or what you have been downloading and accessing globally, what is your sense? What kind of capacity and skills you think we need to build in our, the departments, implementing agencies, that skill building that is needed for a good policy support system? Any reflection on that? You are on mute.
On ground, we have several monitoring stations to catch the surface temperature or the ambient temperatures. But for the surface temperature, we have used the satellite images. As Avikal told, there is a specific time for the satellite to pass over and catch the land use features and the land surface temperatures. So people should get a knowledge about the satellite images also, to get the vast experience over it and get the knowledge about the land surface temperature as well as the ambient temperatures, because both the surface temperature, ambient temperatures, and the data available on the government website such as humidity and the rainfall data, all are these having a cascading impact on the heat stress. So yes, both at the ground level and at the satellite imageries, they play a major role in defining the heat stress in the cities.
Right. Avikal, you want to add anything to that?
Sure, because as our whole study points out, that the heat is a much more complex situation. It's just not about the ambient air temperature. It's also about the changing patterns within the city, land use pattern, the challenge of increasing humidity, and also certain new things which we never thought about, that why the core of Delhi, being so green, is not cooling down at night, which needs to be further investigated. And we need to figure these things out so that when we are building more and how we are redesigning our cities, we do it right. We don't have the time and the infrastructure and resources to make a mistake and then try to correct it. Because everything is happening at a very rapid pace now, and there is very little opportunity to make mistakes. And another thing I would like to add at the end, heat is creating problems across sectors. What we discussed here is more about human comfort within the city and the things. But this additional heat is also gonna make other sectors more problematic to operate. Electricity generation is going to get affected largely because increasing heat impacts the availability of water also for electricity generation, and also affects the efficiency of the turbines used in our thermal power plants. So if we don't have enough water, we won't be able to generate enough electricity to supply. And also during these heat waves, our whole grid, which is basically composed of overhead transmission lines and transformers, they also get overheated and are at high chance of breakouts. So it's not just gonna be safeguarding the cities. We also need to heat proof the infrastructure which supports our cities and houses, which is electricity generation, electricity transmission, water availability. For instance, in Delhi, we had a heat wave, all of body was troubled. A few days later, we had a water crisis. So heat wave is not just going to impact the thermal comfort of people in the city, it's going to have a cascading effect on all the other services as well. And when all of these comes together, a tragedy like 2012's blackout is very possible, where half of the country was out of electricity because excessive demand because of the heat waves tripped the grid because there was not enough electricity to supply, and the problem happened. So the heat wave problem is cross sectoral and it's much bigger than the cities. Of course, we are focusing on cities now, but we need to develop a heat action plan which is cross sectoral, cross infrastructure, and we need to heat proof the whole infrastructure ecosystem which is running this country so that we don't, when the heat comes again, we don't melt down or we go into a blackout. So that's the larger issue. And such large overreaching policy has not happened anywhere in the world. There were some attempts in California, but it didn't work out properly because they didn't understand the problems completely. We need to do this in India, and we need to do this thing, we need to understand the data we have and also develop the capacity to further look into the nuances the data is telling us and make decisions based on what is actually being lived.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm seeing questions, comments just exploding in the chat box. And I wish we had really more time to do justice to all of that. But just before I end, and this is really the last question that I'm going to raise, because I feel that this is one issue that we must address, because heat at the end of the day is a human story. The way each one of us get impacted, especially the vulnerables in the city. And Rajneesh, you have actually mapped that where the vulnerable groups live in cities and where the heat centers are. And so around that, the larger question that is emerging and what the India's cooling action plan is asking for, that the thermal comfort for all. Now, how do we deliver on that? And that's where we really need to understand how our buildings, poor people's buildings, that need to get designed for thermal comfort. I'm seeing certain questions on material construction, etc. You have reflected somewhat on that. But if both of you can just say in a very concise way that how to address this human impact of the heat story.
Sure. So in fact, we've done one study in Kolkata specifically, just for the audience, I'm letting you know. Here we've done a ward-wise level analysis to look at that, the infrastructures which are available. So looking at the typical IPCC methodology, where you looked at what is the extremes which you face, then there are vulnerable population, and then what are the safeguards do we really have. So at ward level, we have done this analysis both for heat as well as flood. Now, when you overlay these on the GIS, what you understand is that where the heat stress is, they are the same areas where the flooding happens, and they are the same area where the poor person lives. So it's a 70% overlap which is there found in all these three layers together. Now, what this indicates is this clearly indicates the chunk of vulnerable group which we have is exposed to extreme kind of condition throughout the year. Be it's during the heat, and even if immediately after the heat, when the monsoon will start hitting in, there will be another problem which will come to them. Now, when you look at, you can say any of the safeguard which needs to be built up and things logically needs to be, the main because most of these developments are very low rise, and the impact could be largely when you look at the material as one of the aspects. So the roof indicators becomes one of the very important in this, because you may not have a larger areas and other things to improve, because that will be the quicker indicators for you to work at. So what we are doing is working with the governments to have an understanding of what is an amount of adaptation, which money which is required to make these habitations or these locations prove to these requirements, right? You have those Ran Basera which is there in the extreme winters, but now you may need those kind of breakout spaces for people when the coolth is required for them. So how you generate this, how you work on this, there are a lot of questions at this moment, but this is the time when the active data granularization should happen. Then only certain amount of solutions will be directed, because money is limited. You need to look at what gives you a maximum advantage. So we are right now, We're not saying the CSC has concluded this. CSC is working on this direction, and slowly, with much more data granularization and support from you comes in, we'll be able to give you a little more better policy directions in this. So it's a pitch to all of you that please come up with little more research. Many of you may be academic, may be into this direction of research. Try to bring out this study more, because this is what is the immediate need and requirement.
Absolutely. Any last thought on this, Abhikar? Then I'll close.
And this is just our start into the foray. We have started looking into the cities. There's a lot of questions, like we are not talking about other sectors, but we have started with the cities, and we will continue our research and go further into all the sectors which I said earlier. And we hope to bring our findings and possible solutions to discuss with you in the near future. So keep following, keep in tune, and we'll keep you updated on all the new research we are doing. Thank you.
Great. I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm not even going to summarize, the amazing range of points that have been raised. All that I want to do right now, before closing, is just kind of highlight some of the key takeaways for where we need to go and how do we address this through a policy framework. What should be the new agenda around this issue? Now, what is interesting that already, as I understand, about close to 40 cities have already framed their heat action plans. That's on record. And some of them, including Delhi, they have included both short-term emergency measure during heat waves and also longer-term systemic changes. So on paper, you have it. But in practice, what we find that cities are largely focused only on emergency plans during heat waves. And all other things, these are largely recommendatory in nature, do not have strong legal backup or committed funding, or even enforceable legal mandate for heat management. That everything that you need to do to reduce the thermal load on the urban infrastructure. And yet, and that's where we are missing the big point. It's not about that we don't have any policy instrument with us. In fact, when just looked at what exists, there are several regulatory instruments that create the legal framework for area planning for heat management. And these are related to urban resource management, land use, thermal comfort, energy efficiency in built environment. But we are not leveraging this effectively, designing them effectively to heat-proof our cities. Take, for instance, the environment impact assessment for buildings and townships, master plans, regional plan development guidelines, building bylaws, cooling action plan, transit-oriented development policy, and more. And all of these are available today for area planning and for a more holistic planning, if you really go by what is written in those policies. And all of these have bearing on siting, layout of buildings, planning for green and blue, material choices, passive architecture, thermal comfort in our buildings, all of that. Yet, none of these are adding up. Even though we are saying a simple thing like that we need to maximize permissible impervious cover norms even. That's a kind of discussion happening now to reduce paved areas, which would increase vegetation, permeation of groundwater, and policies like TOD are actually talking about it. So if done well, if aligned well, all these policies together with a compliance framework that can enable implementation at a scale that can change the microclimate in our cities, which is needed to heat-proof our cities. And that needs to be backed up by very good vulnerability mapping. And it is necessary, as I was mentioning earlier, that cities, to enable that kind of a policy approach and implementation strategy, they need to create a good climate data platform to inform action and also performance-linked funding in our cities today. So everything that you have also said from the data that you have presented, clearly there is no one single silver bullet of action. Like, for instance, the case of Delhi, where we have seen increase in green area that you have just mentioned, and yet the temperature rising, clearly shows that while that may be one step forward, but we have certainly not done enough to address a range of heat generators and the waste heat that's coming from. In fact, this is one area we have not even started to think about, that how do you really address controlling vehicle exhaust heat, the waste heat from industrial processes, air conditioning, that from the perspective of heat management. So policies have emerged. So it's just not about one heat action plans, but there are enabling policies which will have to be aligned, brought together, mainstreamed with very clear indicators, with very clear targets and mandates to be able to deliver on the objective of heat management. So to end, the message from all of us and my colleagues is very clear. We need to act urgently because climate change is the constant. But we have to act urgently and decisively to prevent a massive lock-in of urban heat traps. And that's what we really need to think about very, very deliberately and urgently. So with that, I'll close here. But I would like to thank all my colleagues who have shared excellent insight into this big challenge, and our audience for this very meaningful, fruitful, and constructive participation. It's amazing the kind of questions that you have raised and forced us and challenged us to answer. We certainly hope to take this conversation forward, and this is how we want to build the public support and public energy for the big policy steps forward. So with that, a big thank you to all of you.